Hello and welcome back to Triple Crown Wargaming with me, the Duke, and I am going to talk to you today about the, in my opinion, very exciting latest Old World Almanac, all about Grail Knights. Well, I say all about Grail Knights, specifically it's about Universal Special Rules, but crucially for me, it shows us the profile and some of the rules of Grail Knights. So going through the article, we start with that all-important profile. Couple of things to note. 38 points per model, same points as they've, I say always been since 6th edition at least, but some changes to the profile. So they've gone up a weapon skill, down a ballistic skill, but that very likely is never going to matter. Up a toughness, which I think is really big, and also up a leadership, which is nice. We do also see a separate stat line for a Grail Guardian, which we'll get onto a little bit later. That's essentially a champion, something they didn't used to be able to take. And a potentially different profile to what people were expecting for the Bretonnian Warhorse, based on last week's Almanac, which showed the Unicorn giving like a bonus to the Rider's profile, with I think it was +1 wound off the top of my head it gave. Some people were expecting traditional cavalry mounts, horses, to give a similar, or to have a similar profile where they perhaps added to the Rider's stats in some way. Maybe that would just be movement, or that doesn't make sense, makes more sense for them to have a fixed movement. Maybe that would be toughness or wound, attack perhaps, something like that. But it doesn't. It has a simplified profile, so no ballistic skill, toughness or wounds itself, or leadership, but it has its own weapon skill, strength, initiative and attack. So it looks like you're still going to get a separate attack for the mount as well, and obviously not be able to kill them separately. Which all makes sense, no big changes there. Troop type, heavy cavalry, not just cavalry. So I think, to me, this suggests that we're going to have two types of cavalry, excluding monstrous cavalry. We're going to have light or fast cavalry, and I think what was traditionally fast cavalry will likely be light cavalry. If they go with light and heavy, they could keep it with fast, who knows. But I think you'll have a lighter, more sort of skirmisher type cavalry. Think your Illyrian Reavers, Dark Riders, Pistoliers, Mounted Yeomen for the Bretonnians, that sort of thing. And then your heavy cavalry are more like your shock cavalry, like your Grail Knights, your Knights of the Realm, your Empire Knights, your Chaos Knights, that sort of thing. And obviously, we've got a big, now I would say confirmation, a big confirmation at least of Grail Knight's base size being 30 by 60. Now, this has been heavily speculated that this is going to be the base size for cavalry, online for weeks, if not months, to be honest. Probably since that article, many moons ago, where we got confirmation that 20mm bases, 20mm squares were going up to 25mm, and that most other base sizes were changing. A lot of people have speculated that cavalry will be going up to 30 by 60. They are right, certainly in some cases. However, Games Workshop themselves have confirmed that not all cavalry will have the same size base. Now, I don't know if that means all heavy cavalry will, and then light or fast cavalry will have a different size base. Perhaps some heavy cavalry will have this 30 by 60. Others will have maybe 40 by 60, 25 by 50, who knows. I think that all heavy cavalry will have the same size base, and all light or fast cavalry will have the same size base. That is pure speculation. I have nothing to back that up whatsoever, but that feels like a way to distinguish quite easily, quite quickly, the types of cavalry. Your sort of heavy shock cavalry and your light fast cavalry. Unit size of 3+, they've always been 3+, at least since 6th edition, not a big surprise there. I don't think you're likely to see units of 3, although we have, to be fair, before. Drew, if you're watching, I know you used units of 3 Grail Knights before, quite successfully, I must say, to be fair. Equipment hasn't changed, still got hand weapon with their lance, heavy armour and shields. Bretonnian Warhorse got this counts as hand weapon and barding, so they've still got their barding. And options, before we get into the barding, which will affect their arm saves, which if you've read the article you will know already. But before we get onto that, options. Now, the command, interestingly, isn't... well, I've started early with the interesting. I'm sure I'll mention it many times over the course of this article. But the command, interestingly, isn't just 10 points for each one. They are the same points. They're all 7 points per unit for your champion, your standard bearer, and your musician. But it does make me wonder if every unit is going to, this 7 points is going to be the same for every unit, if it's going to be the same points for each 3 but different per unit, maybe Knights of the Realm of 5 points, Knights of 6 points, something like that, or if it's just going to be 7 points. 7 points feels like an odd number, because as 7 obviously isn't a round number, it doesn't even get to a round number. If you get all 3 of them, you have 21 points. Feels a bit annoying, but I guess we will have to wait and see. The Magic Standard, though, which you can purchase for this unit, up to 100 points now. Now, you used to be able to take up to 50 points, which was traditionally the maximum allowance a unit would have for a Magic Banner. There are some exceptions, but generally that would be the maximum a unit would have. I think this is going to be an exception rather than the rule. I think the Grail Knights having that extra points allowance for a Magic Banner is not going to be the norm. I could be very wrong there. I certainly don't think you'll see every unit being able to have a Magic Banner and a Magic Standard up to 100 points. I think you'll still see some at 50. I think you may well still see some at 25. I suppose it depends how Magic Banners are pointed. That would be a big consideration, to be fair, which obviously we don't know yet, and would inform if this 100 points is going to be the standard. But you can also now take a single knightly virtue on your champion, at least for your champion, for your Grail Knights. So they do a little bit further down, they do give you examples of what they think you might take as a magic standard or a virtue or a magic item. Gives you a bit of a interesting look at some of the Bretonnian and not Bretonnian specific options, which I think is good. But I quite like the idea, actually, of being able to take virtues on knightly champions. Perhaps we'll see it on all knightly champs. I don't think so. I think it'll be a Grail Knight specific thing. And also magic items you can take on your Grail Guardian. Gives you a little bit more flexibility in what you can take. Quite interesting for me. Now, before I go on to the equipment that they've shown us and one of the special rules that applies to that equipment, it is worth noting that they have specified that Grail Knights will only have a save of 3+. So that's 5 up from their heavy armour, +1 for a shield, +1 for being mounted on a barded mount. So you no longer get a +1 to your armour save for being just simply for being mounted. You only get the +1 if that mount is barded. So I quite like this, to be honest. Yes, it does make them a bit more squishy to, weight of fire, low quality attacks, whether that's, I say weight of fire, weight of dice, whether that's combat or shooting. If they're in combat, though, with their stats, I would expect not many attacks coming back at them, with their very high initiative, very high weapon skill, and a lot of attacks, 2 attacks a model, very good. But I think if you sort of extrapolate that across all cavalry in general, thinking of your 1-up armor save, Empire Knights, Chaos Knights, that sort of thing, actually bringing them down to a 2+, now that always was a huge difference, that 1 point of armor from a 1-up to a 2+. In 8th, at least, that made a huge difference. But the thing that really puts this into perspective for me is that strength not affecting how much armour attacks sort of pierce through, it only being based on that AP value, which they have said in a previous article, and I'm trying to remember which one. I think it was combat, might have been shooting, could be wrong there, pretty sure it was one of them. But the strength not affecting how much armour an attack gets through, I think that 1 drop of save is going to mean a lot less. Yes, you will be potentially more susceptible to things like bow fire that didn't have any armour piercing value, as it were. Like, value wasn't a thing, AP value wasn't a thing in 8th, but that didn't get through any armour in 8th edition. Yes, I think you will be slightly more susceptible to that. The extra toughness on the Grail Knights does really help there, though. Traditionally, obviously, bows being strength 3, half of the hits would wound, now only a third. It's going to make a big difference. So, touching on the equipment that they mention in this article, then the lance specifically, it's still strength +2 on a turn in which you charge. Only cavalry or monster units or troop types can use a lance. And the monster one's interesting, although I would guess rather that is for characters mounted on monsters. And I would assume cavalry also applies to monstrous cavalry. But again, that is a guess. It makes sense that it would apply to monstrous cavalry, but it doesn't actually specify, so potentially not. They've also got AP -2 lances, and are this Armour Bane at 1. Now, we've seen Armour Bane, I want to say twice before this. I want to say the shooting article and the combat article. But now we finally get confirmation of what Armour Bane does, and I think a lot of people would have guessed, assumed, speculated that this is what the rule did, but on a natural roll of a 6, when making your to-wound rolls, the armour-piercing characteristic of the weapon is improved by the number shown in the brackets. So Lances have Armour Bane 1, so on a to-wound roll of a 6, they are actually AP -3, the -2 plus the -1, effectively. It makes it -3. I've seen some mixed reactions to this online. To me, I like it. I don't think it really adds any admin or any sort of time to working it out during the game. It's not that difficult to go, oh, there's 4 6s there, these are -3, the rest are -2, something like that. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I quite like the rule, to be honest. Sticking with the theme of special rules then, they say that there are about 75 universal special rules in the game. Now, off the top of my head, I don't know how many there were in 8th. I would guess something like 40-ish in the main rulebook. Now, you obviously get a lot more in army books that are specific to the army, or even sometimes specific units or characters. But I'd say universal special rules, they're somewhere around 40 in 8th edition. So almost doubling that feels like a lot. But, as they said, a lot of things which, in 8th and potentially editions before, were spread all over the place in the rulebook, weren't in that universal special rules umbrella, like psychology, unit coherence, which I think is an interesting phrase, and rules for monsters. They are all now in the universal special rule system. So as much as it feels like potentially a bloating of the amount of special rules, I don't think mechanically it will make all that much of a difference. So they go on to say that actually close order is a good example of that. So previously you just had to know if a units were or weren't skirmishers or fast cavalry. Then if they weren't either of those, they were a normal, in inverted commas, unit. They operate in ranks and files. Now that's just something we know as close order. So that's all that effectively means. That does bring me back to the video that I did when the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth rules came out. I can't remember what Almanak that was. I think it was Combat, though I could be wrong. Whatever Almanak that Dragon Ogre Shaggoth profile was in, he has the close order special rule. So it must do something else other than just to tell you it operates in ranks and files. Because the Unicorn from the last preview didn't have close order. And that, I would imagine, could go in units, being a mount for a character. Whereas the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth, being a monster, is very unlikely to be able to go in units. But the fact he's got close order suggests to me close order must do something other than just tell you it operates in ranks and files. Potentially, thinking about it now off the top of my head, it might mean that he can't, traditionally in 8th, if you were a single model, you could pivot on the spot rather than wheel, and it wouldn't take up any of your movement. Perhaps close order, him having close order, means that he won't be able to do that, and you'll have to wheel him even though he's a single model. I'm going to say it again. That's interesting. That hadn't occurred to me. So yeah, potentially that's what the inclusion of close order means. Yeah, interesting. It'd be interesting to see what close order does. I said interesting about 4 times in that sentence. I'm sure I'll be getting comments about that down below. But it's interesting. I'm going to say it again. It is interesting. It does say every unit has all of its formations listed as a universal special rule. So perhaps they just didn't include that on the Unicorns one. Perhaps I'm misremembering. I don't think I am. I'm pretty sure it didn't include it. Also, things like stomp attacks, which were traditionally something that all monsters and monstrous units got. Now it's more specific in which units get the rule. So not, if you're a monster, you won't necessarily get Stomp or Thunder Stomp. Just because you're monstrous infantry or cavalry, you won't get Stomp. It's very specific as to which units have this. I don't mind that. Makes it potentially a little harder to remember, although if you're looking at the profile, it then jogs your memory. Yeah, I've got this stomp. How many times have we, done a combat, moved on to the next turn and gone, I forgot my thunder stomp. Could have made a big difference. I've done it way more than than I want to admit, particularly with my ogres being my first army, and having played them for 10 years or so now. Yeah, I've done that way too much. But as they go on to say, there are also specific rules which only affect units from a particular army, and some even, like we have now, that are only specific to a particular unit, perhaps characters, and they're listed on individual profiles. Some of those rules, some of those specific to army rules, we've seen in on the Grail Knight's profile. First one they go into is Blessings of the Lady. So from this little bit of blurb, this works exactly like it did in 6th edition, in the 6th edition book. Bretonnians may get off their horses and pray for the protection of the lady at the start of the game. This means that they don't roll to see who goes first. That's an interesting, I've said it again, really try and stop myself. That's a nice little point though, because that suggests that that's not going to change. It's not just going to be I finished deploying first, I go first type thing. It's still going to be a roll-off, probably, to see who goes first. Not something that I think anyone was particularly worried about changing, but yeah, a little hint as to how the game itself is generally going to play. Anyway, so Bretonnians can still give up that roll to see who goes first, suggesting that their opponent still chooses to pray for the protection of the lady. They get a 6-up ward save, or a 5-up against any wounds caused by strength 5 or higher, and they can still lose it. It suggests in the same ways as well if a unit flees or a character declines a challenge. I believe there was a third way that a knight unit could lose the blessing, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. So perhaps it's slightly changed, but generally it's very much the same. Countercharge. Now we did see this in the, I imagine it was the combat article. It might have been movement, but I imagine it was the combat article. That this only works against monsters, cavalry, and chariots. So if a unit with Countercharge is charged by any of those types of units from a longer distance than their attacker's movement characteristics, then they can move d3 plus 1 inches in response, and both parties count as charging. Now they do add on to this sentence that the initiative then comes into play, and I've seen a few people online suggest that that means that if you charge, you go first, like it was in, I want to say 5th and 6th. I don't think it was the same in 7th, I could be wrong. But if you charged, you went first. I don't think that's what this means. I think, and they specified in that combat Almanak that you get a bonus to the chance of going first, a bonus to your initiative, I'd say, to going first, rather than just you definitely go first. So I think that, and then initiative comes into play, suggests that actually you're going to get quite a good bonus for charging to your initiative, but and not necessarily guaranteed to go first. And then obviously if both of you charge, it just goes back to your base initiatives. Next up, another Bretonnian only rule. So Countercharge isn't specified as Bretonnian only, so I don't think it's going to be just them. I don't think it's going to be all cavalry. It could well be all heavy cavalry, but I don't see it, to be honest. I think it's going to be very specific cavalry units. But Finest Warhorses is a Bretonnian only rule. I guess this is the new version of Bretonnian. To be honest, it might have been called the same thing in the 6th edition book. I was going to say Bretonnian Warhorse, but actually I think it was called Finest Warhorses or something along those lines anyway. But it does a very different thing. So previously it ignored the movement penalty that Barding gave you in 6th to 8th, because they never changed the book. But now you can re-roll any ones when you charge, flee or pursue before discarding any dice. That's huge. I absolutely love that rule. As a Bretonnian player, against a Bretonnian, I imagine I'm going to hate the rule, but I really, really like that rule. Really helps you almost guarantee, not guarantee of course, but almost guarantee getting those charges in. Really, really big fan of that. First charge is another one they've got. Again, doesn't specify it's Bretonnian only. I don't think it's going to be then. But on their first charge of the game, the target unit that gets charged loses its rank bonus until the next round of combat. It's really going to help cavalry units with this first charge break through blocks, break through anything really, on that first turn they charge. You know, with their massive impact that blocks of knights traditionally had, feels like that's going to be represented by this first charge special rule. Again, big fan of it. They do sort of slightly mention what lance formation lets you do. It just says it lets them form their signature devastating charge formation, offering them a choice, so they can either be in lance or traditional close order. It doesn't actually say if there are any benefits to being in lance formation, what exactly that formation is, although we have seen it in their pictures that it's that sort of arrowhead, 1 then 2 then 3 etc. formation. I would suggest that it's going to be the same or very similar rules from 5th edition, where all the knights on the sort of outside of the arrowhead, on the two sloped sides as it were, counted as being in base contact and could therefore attack. I'm guessing that's what it's going to do. Living Saints. So this is a unique special rule that only Grail Knights have, and this gives them the ability to issue challenges to enemy characters. Interestingly, it doesn't say accept challenges. I would assume that because they can issue, they can accept. But no, maybe not. Perhaps not. But they can all issue challenges to enemy characters, which I did when I first saw the profile at the top of this article. I didn't think they'd keep that because they've now got a champion. So I felt like Living Saints before, it's called the same thing in 6th edition, that was given to them because they didn't have a champion in the unit. Now they do have a champion option, but perhaps that means unit champions aren't going to be able to issue challenges. Yeah, that could be interesting actually. If I've said it again, if unit champions can't issue challenges, that's then this is again still a really big boon for the Bretonnians. Protects those potentially the wizards that are in those units, or other characters that are much better at tearing through the rank and file rather than going toe to toe with a character. You can just accept with a Grail Knight and let your characters do some smushing. Yeah, like that a lot. Now, Swift Stride. This is again not going to be Bretonnian specific, but the wording here is I'm going to say it again, it is interesting. It adds something which we haven't really, or was never really delved into that much, but about your maximum charge range being different to just the most you can roll on the dice that you roll. So it's a Swift Stride adds a further 3 inches to your maximum charge range, and plus d6 to any given charge, flight, or pursuit. So, Grail Knight's movement 8. We know that you then roll 2d6, pick the highest for your charge, and then we're also told in the movement Almanac that Swift Stride units add an extra d6 to this. So effectively making their sort of charge range 8 plus the highest of 2d6 plus d6. However, what this suggests is that you're actually not going to be able to declare a charge that is more than 17 inches away. So that's 8 plus a 6 off of which is the highest possible of the first 2d6 picking the highest, plus this 3 that Swift Stride adds. So even though you could potentially roll a 20 on 8 plus 2d6 pick the highest plus d6, you're not actually going to be able to declare a charge that is more than 17 inches away. So that, I think, helps balance the scales between cavalry, particularly Swift Stride cavalry, and infantry, who, maximum charge range realistically is going to be about 11 if you're an elf and you move 5. Can't think of any infantry that moves 6. Potentially Saurus. Skinks. Skinks move 6. There we go. Yeah, so, okay, maybe 12. But that, that boost that cavalry, particularly Swift Stride cavalry, get that's actually not going to be as much of a difference now between maximum charges, even with Swift Stride. It's only a 5-inch difference. So as much as cavalry do still have the advantage, which I absolutely think they should have, it's not as wild as, I can sit 7 inches, 8 inches out of your maximum charge range as infantry and still potentially get in that charge. That's not going to be the case. So I like that. Adds a bit of balance to what before, after we'd just seen the movement Almanac, felt the really sort of heavily skewed in the cavalry's favour. And the last one then, the last of the special rules that they really go into, that the Grail Knights have, is the Grail Vow. So this means they're unaffected by fear and terror. Not immune to psychology, so they could flee, which they couldn't before because it made them immune to psych. Gives them magical attacks, which is what it did before. And, a little bit extra, the first time they fail a break test, they may automatically fall back in good order rather than just fleeing. Really like the idea of that. I don't think it's going to come up very often because, well, I mean, if it does, I don't think it's going to matter. Let me put it that way, because you're not. You want to charge all of your bonuses that you get from charging, from your lance, etc. I don't think, falling back a few inches rather than fleeing 2d6 inches is really going to make a difference. It might, in that you might not give up your points, you might not get destroyed, of course, but I think if you're losing combats like that, you're probably going to get beaten in the grind anyway. It might just slow it down a bit. Not bad, though. Certainly not a bad rule. Now, we touched on before that there are a lot of options for Grail Knight, particularly the Grail Knight champions. But Grail Knight units in general, they can have a magic banner and a virtue on the champion and some magic items on the champion. And they give you some suggestions about what virtues items that you might give them. So they look into the virtue of the Impetuous Knight, something we had in the 6th edition book. It seems to do a very similar thing. I'll go into it in a second. A dragon slaying sword, which could be specifically Bretonnian. I could definitely see it being specifically Bretonnian, might not be though. And the blazing banner, which I definitely think isn't specific to Bretonnians. This is essentially the flaming banner from 8th edition, gives you units flaming attacks. Nice and simple. Nice that it's still in there. It's a staple magic banner, really. Like that it's still been included. Going sort of up the list of the 3 that I gave you, the dragon slaying sword. So I like that they've given it a range of combat. That's a nice little addition. Strength is S, which I'm taking to mean the user's strength. Interesting that they just made it S rather than maybe an asterisk, but maybe that's just simplifying it. No AP, gives you magical attacks. That's quite a specific inclusion, I think. Perhaps that means that magic weapons won't generally give you magical attacks. Like, just because you've got a magic weapon doesn't mean you'll have magical attacks. That could really skew the usefulness of certain magic items. If magical attacks does more than just let you hurt ethereal things, if it, I don't know, what could it do? It might give you additional AP, it might help you hit more, it might help you wound, it might ignore regeneration, perhaps like flaming. I don't think it will, because that's sort of what flaming does, but lots of different things it could do. If it does do more than just let you hurt ethereal things, which generally there aren't a lot of, that could, like I say, really skew the sort of effectiveness of otherwise maybe untaken magic weapons. Traditionally in 8th, there were a lot of magic weapons you just never saw, because either they were too many points, they didn't have a good enough effect. Maybe this magical attacks will sort of boost those sort of weapons up to much more usable, much more commonly taken, which I like the idea of. And it also gives you the special rule Monster Slayer. Now, no suggestion of what this does, unfortunately, but I'm gonna go back to it. I'm gonna speculate again. There are 3 things I think this could do. This could give you what used to be Heroic Killing Blow. Could just be on a 6 to win, you ignore their armor save. If they've got a ward save, they can take it. If they fail it, they're dead. I don't think it will do that, but it could. What I think is a lot more likely is it will either give you a bonus to wound monsters, already a unit with the monster type, or it will give you reroll to wound against monsters. There are other things it could do. It might just ignore armor in those types. It might wound on a specific value to units of that type. Lots of things it could do, but those, really, the last 2, those are the 2 that I think it will do. I think it'll either give you reroll to wound against monsters or +1 to wound against monsters. But we'll have to wait and see. The last one then is the Virtue, which is obviously Bretonnian specific. The Dragon Slaying Sword, I don't know if it... it could be, it really could be Bretonnian specific. They do like slaying dragons. I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to say, it's going to be Bretonnian specific. Nothing to say that it will be, but I'm going to say it will be. Yeah, sure. That's my prediction. Anyway, the Virtue of the Impetuous Knight. This is obviously Bretonnian specific. The model and its unit increases its maximum possible charge range again by 3 inches. However, they gain the Impetuous special rule. Again, doesn't tell us what this is. If it's like the Impetuous rule that Knights Errant had in 6th edition, or in the 6th edition book at least, then you'll have to attempt to restrain yourself from making a charge if it is possible to do so. So it's just a leadership test. I imagine it will do something similar, makes you more likely to charge even if you don't want to. So I imagine that will be something similar. But yeah, increases the maximum possible charge range again, potentially on a unit with Swift Stride, potentially up in that maximum charge to 20 inches. And when this model and its unit makes a charge roll, you can apply an additional D3 modifier to the result. Not on the first charge, every time it makes a charge. That's a big change from 6th edition. It used to be you add D6 inches to your first charge, which I think is a very double-edged sword, but I'll go into that another time, I'm sure. This one is you just, every time you make a charge roll, you apply a D3 modifier to it. Big fan of that. Obviously, we don't know the points of any of these items or virtues yet, but yeah, generally, big fan of that. Now, a lot of the time in these almanacs, that's all they sort of really go into in detail, but a lot of the time in these almanacs, the last little paragraph just tells you what's coming next week. Now, they don't do that in this one, but they do mention something else, which I think has been missed by a few people, and that is a different Bretonnian unit, one that didn't have an equivalent of the same name, at least in 8th edition, and that is the Bretonnian Squires. Now, it tells you some of the rules that these guys have. They have move through cover, they have open order, peasantry, skirmishers, and vanguard. So, big things in there for me. Vanguard, good to know that's still in. Obviously, you don't know what it does, but would guess it probably does the same sort of thing. Might be like a scout deployment now rather than move before the game, not sure. Skirmishers, we've seen that before in the, I want to say, movement almanac. Peasantry, I'm going to guess that's something like the Peasant's Duty that was in the 6th edition book. Meant that, well, in that book it meant that knights didn't take panic tests from those units fleeing or dying. Will likely be similar. Oh, it also meant that they could use the knight's leadership. Will likely be something similar. Could be something more specific, who knows. Open order. So, they haven't super gone into this, but it's not quite skirmishers, and it's not quite close order. So, I think, although they do also have skirmishers, which is interesting, so I think that will be a choice, whether you deploy them open order or skirmishers. And they've also got move through cover, which was never a rule in 8th edition, which suggests that terrain is going to do a lot more to affect movement than it did in 8th edition, which, to be honest, I think is a good thing. So a lot of the time, particularly, gaming clubs, things like that, you'd have very generic terrain that would generally just be a ruin, a ruined house or a ruined wall or bit of a building, something like that. And there were never rules for ruins in 8th edition. So I think having this suggesting that you're going to have rules that affect, that make terrain affect your movement, and then potentially units with move through cover ignoring those, I think that's a good hint at some rules to come. But yeah, this Bretonnian Squires unit, slightly off track, getting back to the point, this Bretonnian Squires unit, I think this could be the equivalent of you being able to upgrade in 6th edition one of your peasant archer units to be skirmishers. I think this is the equivalent of that. So perhaps there'll be a little better ballistic skill. They might even be a better weapon skill, who knows. There'll probably be a few more points, but they'll do a slightly different role to your traditional peasant archer units. And I really like that idea, actually. I like that idea of having them as a completely separate unit rather than just an upgrade. That I think you can only do once anyway. You can only have one unit of them. I think it gives you some more options. I could be very wrong there. The fact they are peasants, though, so it would suggest that they're going to be something like that. They might not be a ranged unit. It could be a combat unit. It could be that this is the new name for mounted yeomen. That's another option, because they're sort of the bridge between, a very low peasant and a knight. That's sort of the bridge. Not that many, traditionally in the lore, not that many individuals would move up from peasant to yeoman to knight. It happens, but rarely. But perhaps this unit is that mounted yeoman unit. It's just a new name for them. But that again, that would be quite nice to know that they haven't changed too much. They get a bit bonus for moving through cover, that sort of thing. that's that's quite nice. They also mention questing vow, not in a sort of sense of the rule, but that's very likely still in there, which I think makes sense. And they do sneak in that the Warhammer the Old World rulebook will be going on pre-order sometime in the new year. Now, they don't say early in the new year. I think it's going to be early in the new year, because what they also don't do is say what's coming in the next Rules Almanac. And I think that's because there isn't going to be one. So they have confirmed on, I believe it was on Facebook, on a comment on one of their posts, that we will still be getting something this year. It'll be likely another article. They didn't say it would be another almanac. They didn't say it would be rules based. They didn't really say anything about what it would be, to be honest. They just confirmed that we would be getting something. So that's good. That is a positive. I think we're all hoping for something big. Me personally, I'm hoping for a base size chart. But we will have to see. But we are going to get something. So hopefully next Monday we'll have something else. Could be the Monday after. Nice little Christmas Day reveal. Maybe that will tell us when the Old World Rulebook is going on pre-order. Who knows? But we will have to wait and see. On that note, I've got to the end of the almanac, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me. Head down below to the comment section. Let me know what you thought about the almanac, what special rules or items that they showed off really stood out to you, what you think of the Grail Knights. Hopefully, we'll see you back next Monday for another reaction video if they release anything. If they don't worry, you can still get your Triple Crown Wargaming fix here on YouTube. Check out all of the battle reports and other videos we've got here, and then if you like that, you can head over to triplecrownwargaming.com, sign up for a Night of the Realm, and check out all of the exclusive videos we've got on there. But for now, we will see you next time.
Remember to tag your friends and like, subscribe and share. Then head over to triplecrownwargaming.com and become a Knight of the Realm today.
What are you doing, mate?
You alright?
Do it for Warhammer!